It was July 3rd, 1988. An Iranian passenger flight was preparing to depart from Tehran to Dubai, carrying 290 civilians on board. Families, children, businessmen, tourists. For them, it was just another ordinary flight on an ordinary day. The aircraft took off normally and began flying over the Strait of Hormuz. But minutes later, in the middle of the sea, the flight was suddenly blown apart, killing all 290 passengers on board. It became one of the deadliest aviation tragedies in Iran's history. Iran demanded answers, and the very next day they got one. America released a statement saying the attack had been a mistake. No apology, no acceptance of responsibility, just a press release. Iran was furious. Fast forward to 2026, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz to global trade. Oil prices are skyrocketing, markets are panicking, every news channel across the world is talking about just one thing.
Tehran wants a say over the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Strait of Hormuz, right?
Almost like a war for the Strait of Hormuz.
At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is just barely 20 miles wide, shorter than a marathon. And yet, every single day, more than 20 million barrels of oil pass through this tiny stretch of water. This is the Strait of Hormuz, the jugular vein of the global economy. Whoever controls these waters controls nearly 25% of the world's oil supply. Now, Iran has shut it down, but that raises some serious questions. Why did America shot down an Iranian passenger flight in 1988? How did Iran gain control over one of the world's most important trade routes? And most important of all, why is all of this happening right now? Let's find it out. The world is dependent on oil for everything. So if one of the world's busiest strait is shut, that naturally affects the world. This strait is responsible for 1/4 of the world's oil supply. You see, the oil conflict that we see today is relatively new. This passage traded more than just oil. In order to understand this, let's rewind back to the 15th century. It is 1500 AD, and the Strait of Hormuz is still one of the most busiest and critical waterways for maritime trade. But this time, it was not just oil. It was spices, silk, and horses. This region is divided as Iran, Iraq, Israel, and several other nations as we know now. But from the 15th century to the 18th century, this region was mostly known as the Persia, and it was just under one rule, the Safavid dynasty. When everything was going well, in 1507, the Portuguese explorers saw an opportunity. They saw the Strait of Hormuz as a big financial opportunity. They built a fortress on the island of Hormuz, turned the entire Persian Gulf into a private toll. They enforced a system of permits called the cartazas. Pay to trade, or just don't pass at all. For the next 100 years, Portugals were draining wealth for every ship that crossed these waters. In 1622, the Safavid dynasty joined hands with English East India Company and formed an alliance to overthrow the Portugals from the Strait of Hormuz. Together, they attacked the Portuguese fortress and reclaimed the control of the strait. Trade resumed and the blockade ended. But the world had learned a dangerous lesson. Control the water and you control the wealth. Fast forward to 1908. Everything changed when Iran discovered massive reserves of oil beneath its soil. What was once an important trade route had now become something far more valuable: liquid gold. But Iran was not the only one interested in it. Britain, which already had a strong presence in the region, quickly moved to secure control over the Iranian oil. Over the next few decades, British companies dominated the industry, extracting enormous wealth, while Iran received only a fraction of the profits. During this period, Iran was ruled by the Shahs of the Pahlavi dynasty. From 1925 to 1979, the Pahlavi rulers governed Iran with strong backing from the West. To many Iranians, the Shah was not just a king. He was seen as a puppet of the Western powers. But the real turning point came in 1951. A person named Mossadegh became the Prime Minister of Iran. And unlike the rulers before him, Mossadegh challenged the West directly. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, including the massive Abadan refinery, which at that point of time was the largest refinery in the world. His message was simple: this is our oil and we are taking it back. Britain was furious. Losing Iranian oil was not just an economic problem for them, it was a strategic disaster. So Britain retaliated. The Royal Navy was deployed near the port of Abadan, effectively creating a blockade around Iran's oil exports. No ships in, no oil out. And just like that, Iran was economically isolated from the world. Mohammad Mossadegh refused to back down. To millions of Iranians, he became a national hero. The man who stood up to the foreign powers and reclaimed Iran's oil wealth. People flooded to the streets in support of him. Protests erupted across the country. The pressure became so intense that even the Shah was forced to flee Iran. For a brief moment, it looked like Iran had finally broken free from the Western control. But that victory didn't last long. In 1953, the CIA, from alongside the British intelligence, orchestrated a coup against Mossadegh. The Prime Minister was overthrown, and the Shah was brought back to power. What followed was a compromise. Iran technically kept the ownership of its oil, but the profits would now be shared with Western oil companies in a 50-50 arrangement. Once again, the balance of power had shifted towards the West. But inside Iran, anger was growing. Years of foreign interference, economic control, and Western influence had left deep scars within Iranian society. The frustration kept building, waiting for an explosion. And that, finally, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution changed the country forever. The Shah was overthrown and a new Islamic regime rose to power under the leader Ayatollah Khomeini. And this new Iran wanted one thing above all: to completely cut ties with the West. Then came the moment that shattered US-Iran relations forever. Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran and took 52 American diplomats as hostage. For America, it was a humiliation on the world stage. For Iran, it was revenge against decades of Western interference. The hostility between the two nations had now reached a breaking point. The United States stayed silent publicly, but it was waiting for an opportunity. That opportunity came in 1980. Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, backed by the Western powers including the United States, launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. Until 1984, the Iran-Iraq war was fought mostly on land. But by 1984, that conflict had reached a dangerous new phase. The United States had openly tilted towards Iraq, providing intelligence, military assistance, and naval presence in the region.
But we also said that it should not be used as a pretext for an American interference in the area. It should not be used as a cover for a military coming back by the United States in the area. Apparently, the United States is not listening.
American warships began operating near Strait of Hormuz to protect the oil shipments and secure Western interests. Iran responded aggressively. To disrupt trade and pressure its enemies, Iran started laying naval mines across the Persian Gulf, targeting Iraqi, Kuwaiti, and Saudi vessels. Very quickly, the conflict spilled into the global trade. Oil prices began to rise, shipping routes became deadly, and insurance costs exploded. The world feared that the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz could collapse entirely. So the United States escalated further. American warships began escorting oil tankers through the strait, guiding civilian ships through one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. Every passing vessel now moved through a war zone. Then in 1988, disaster struck. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a US Navy warship escorting tankers in the Gulf, hit an Iranian naval mine. The explosions nearly tore the ship apart. America responded immediately. The US launched an operation called Praying Mantis, one of the largest naval attacks since World War II. In just a single night, much of Iran's navy was destroyed and severely damaged. The region was now standing on the edge of total war. And then came the moment that changed everything. With tensions already at their absolute peak, an American warship shot down Iranian Air Flight 655, a civilian passenger aircraft. All 290 people on board were killed. Men, women, children. In an instant, the line between military conflict and human tragedy disappeared. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer just a trade route, it became the graveyard. Through all these years, Iran realized something important. Its neighbors were either rivals, hostile powers, or nations aligned with the West. And whenever Iran came under pressure, the Gulf nations rarely stood with them. To Iran, the message was very clear. They were alone, isolated, and vulnerable. So Iran decided to change the balance of power. If military alliances could not protect them, then fear would. Iran began heavily investing in its nuclear program. By early 2000s, Iran's nuclear ambitions had become one of the biggest geopolitical flashpoints in the world. For the West, this was unacceptable. Because if Iran became a nuclear power, the entire balance of the Middle West would change overnight. Israel and Iraq were right next door. So Saudi Arabia would feel threatened too. And America fearing nuclear arms race across the region. So the United States and its European allies responded with wave after wave of economic sanctions. Year after year, the pressure kept increasing. Iran's economy began to suffer. Its currency weakened. Oil exports dropped. Inflation exploded. And Iran started looking for leverage. In 2008, Iran threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The response from America was immediate. The United States warned that blocking the strait would be considered as an act of war. Iran backed down. But the tensions didn't end there. In 2012, the European Union imposed a full embargo on Iranian oil exports, cutting deeply into the country's economy. This time, Iran's message became more serious. No more warnings, no more threats. Iran declared that it could close the Strait of Hormuz entirely, choking the world's oil supply at its source. The West responded with force. United States, France, and United Kingdom sent aircraft carriers, destroyers, and warships through the Strait of Hormuz as a direct show of military power. The message was simple and clear. If you close the strait, we will reopen it. Iran stepped back once again. But over the decades, Iran had learned something very crucial. It could never defeat the West in a conventional war. So instead, Iran chose an asymmetric strategy. Turn the Strait of Hormuz itself into a weapon. Because the shipping lanes through the strait are unbelievably narrow. At some points, the safe navigational channel for massive oil tankers is barely a few miles wide. And Iran claims authority over these waters extending 12 nautical miles from its coastline. That changes everything. In such a narrow passage, even a few mines, a handful of speedboats, or the seizure of a single tanker can shake the entire global economy. On April 28, 2015, Iranian patrol boats seized a Danish-owned container ship in the Strait of Hormuz, claiming it was part of the legal dispute. But to the rest of the world, the message was much bigger. Iran was showing that it could stop global shipping whenever it wanted. Then came 2019. The British-flagged oil tanker was captured by Iran. Tehran claimed it was retaliation, a response to the British Royal Marines seizing an Iranian tanker near the Strait of Gibraltar just a few weeks earlier. And the tension kept rising and rising. In 2024, Iranian special forces boarded another oil tanker, this time linked to Israel. The line was being tested again and again. Because for decades, Israel had feared one outcome above all, a nuclear-armed Iranian regime. And eventually, that fear turned out into an action. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched massive airstrikes across Iran, targeting military bases, missile systems, and nuclear facilities. For the first time, Israeli strikes directly hit Iranian soil on a large scale. Iran responded almost immediately. Waves of drones and missiles were launched towards Israel. The Middle East was now on fire. Global markets panicked. Oil prices surged. The world watched in fear as the possibility of a regional war becoming real. Then on June 22, the United States officially entered the conflict. B-2 stealth bombers crossed into action. Massive bunker buster bombs targeted Iran's underground nuclear facilities under a coordinated military operation reportedly known as the Operation Midnight Hammer. Iran retaliated within hours. Rockets and missiles struck American military bases in Qatar and Iraq. At that moment, the red line had finally been crossed. Iranian state media soon reported that the Iranian parliament had voted to close the Strait of Hormuz. The world held its breath. But the closure never came. Not yet. 2026 changed everything. The United States and Israel launched large-scale strikes across Iran, targeting military infrastructures, command centers, and senior leadership. Among those reportedly killed was Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with the several top military officials. And that moment, the line was crossed. For Iran, this was no longer about sanctions or nuclear negotiations or proxy wars. This was survival. And Iran finally did what it had threatened for decades. It closed the Strait of Hormuz. The strait is closed. If anyone tries to pass, they will burn. This time, it was no longer a warning. Drones and missiles began targeting commercial vessels crossing the Gulf. Some ships turned back immediately, others were destroyed or damaged. And just like that, the artery of the global trade was severed. Oil exports from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates came to a halt almost overnight. The consequences were immediate. Oil prices surged violently as nearly a quarter of the world's oil supply was suddenly trapped behind a war zone. But Iran understood something very important. Instead of challenging the West in open battle, Iran transformed the Strait of Hormuz itself into a kill zone. The strategy was brutally simple. If we cannot sell our oil, then nobody else will either. Iran knew exactly what would happen if oil prices crossed $200 or even $300 per barrel. Citizens across America, Europe, Asia, India would feel the pain instantly. Fuel prices, food prices, transportation, electricity, everything would become much more expensive. And eventually, public pressure would force the governments to act against Israel to stop the war. The United States and Israel believed that eliminating Iran's top leadership would cripple the regime. Instead, they triggered something far more dangerous: a geopolitical suicide switch. And now, the world is scrambling for alternatives. New pipelines, new shipping routes, new alliances, but none of them can truly replace the Strait of Hormuz. Because as long as the world runs on oil, this narrow 20-mile stretch of water will remain one of the most dangerous and strategically important places on Earth. And for the first time in decades, Iran has the leverage now. And America believed this would end just like, every other confrontation. Pressure, threats, and eventual surrender. But this time, they may have awakened a sleeping beast.